te whaatalo whātu mai mo mai o le tātua tunu i le nei vaenga o le afiafi ma lo lava le soifo maua ma le langi mama ia o le veinga ma le whaafatai le tua o no mwhentu te mai lo to soifua ia o sa mātou fo iola i le whai ungo le nei fo iaso i whiau mga aduenga sa whengai mo le tātua tunu ia pe ona sila fia o le pose lilo i le whaafonga mai ma le mai momo mai fo i le tātua tunu tātua reporti pe ona tu ina tu sai fo i ma le tūlanga pe ona tūlai mai i le tūmalo i manua pe ona silafia wa ato sa vadi nei le tolu wa yaso talu ona luluina ia ele le motu sa i se mafue pe fe ona failo atu le o lo le teimi nei po fe tonu na vale vaenga le mafue ia tatu mafue e pe ona luluai ia le motu sa ai o le fafatai pe ona mawale nei afiafi ona le wa matu fatasiai ma manisi fo i ono ia le to mai fa petoa o ila to wasila fia uma tulanga i mafui e o maunga mu matulanga uma whapea. Le la amatu tala no atu e whaamana malama atu le tātua tunu ia nisi fo i o tulanga uma i tusa i maunga mu ma mafui e peona tula i mai i lo tātua tu malo i manua. Peona to mai mo mai o lo mau whatasi tuai ma lisi fo i o fo mai peona tau mai Hawaii mai le tātua ofisa o le USGS i Hawaii ia whaape fo i ma le whaletua ia Illinois lutu McMua leo mātou whaatase tuai le nei fiafi le wha moe nei whaatala noa le nei mata upu ia ma whaamala mra matua i fo i le tātua tunu ia nisi fo i awala i te tau na nofa sao ni i fo i ma sila iai ina nei tūlai mai se whaalavlave. Talofan, good evening everyone. Thank you once again for joining us on this special program this evening. As you have heard on the news and of course our reports, it's been 3 weeks now since the shakes started in Manua. We have here with us Dr. Drew Downs as well as Dr. Natalia Deling from USGS in Honolulu, Hawaii. They're here to talk about what's happening in Manua, and we also have Eleanor Lutu McMoore from our Weather Bureau here in American Samoa. The fundamental objective of tonight's discussion is to inform the public of what's happening in Manua and perhaps provide you with answers, because I know for a fact that there are a lot of people asking questions constantly about what's happening in Manua, and that is the reason why we're having this discussion tonight. So thank you once again, and welcome. It's great to have you. Welcome to American Samoa. I think we'll begin with Eleanor. Eleanor, se e whaamamainga ia le tātou whaamoemoe wa alai o na tātou malotia le nei whiawhi le tātou ofisa?
Ia whawhitai lava mo le awanua e whaatasi mai e matopaanga le nei tū la. Ia opa ia mamalu le atunu o le ale o atu e stala o na awa uma o na saunua te ita i sunga ia tosi. Ai avea o masui o le fōmai ia Deline, ia whaapea le fōmai ia Downs, e whaafatai atuai mo le nei awanoa, ia whaatalo whaatu i le malu tatoa tunu o matamata mai le nei talanoanga. Ia o e ui o mātou uma e mai le whetarale, e se mātou matawhaioi, ia o a o mai mātou ofisa tau i tāwhuna, e ngafa mātou matulanga ese masuinga o tau i ngā lue whaatasi mātou ma le Pacific Tsunami Warning Center o loi Hawaii o mātou ma le Pacific Tsunami Warning Center o loi mātou i lalo o le wawainga o le NOAA National Weather Service o le US Department of Commerce i o fōma i nei o Deline ia whaapea i o fōma ia Drew Downs i o la ua e lalo la ua le USGS o lo ilalo wawainga o le US Department of Interior. Ia, o la ua fo ilea, e ngawhala tō ma le wawainga i maungamu ia whaapea mafui e. So I just wanted to reintroduce again, because there are some people that think that we have the responsibility of issuing or the expertise of issuing the advisories or anything with regards to volcanoes and earthquakes. So I'm very thankful and blessed in coordination with the government that we were able to form our partnership or collaboration with our USGS colleagues, Dr. Natalia Deline, as well as Dr. Drew Downs, sorry about that,
No problem.
who were able to come into the territory to help us with what's happening in Manua. They are with the USGS, which is under the U.S. Department of Interior, whereas for us, we are under the U.S. National Weather Service with the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, which is under the U.S. Department of Commerce.
Malo, thank you very much, Eleanor. Dr. Deline and Dr. Downs, you guys are the most popular people now in American Samoa, and I know that for a fact, because everyone is now looking at you guys to provide answers of what's happening in Manua. Before we go to that, this is perhaps your first time in American Samoa, and you've been called, and thank you very much for coming over at a very short notice to assist us with what's happening in Manua. So you've been to Manua, Dr. Deline. Tell us what's going on.
Right. First of all, talofa, and thank you so much for having us here to talk with you. So I arrived here on Thursday night. This was as soon as we could get anyone from the U.S. Geological Survey here, because as you know, there's only 2 flights a week. And Dr. Drew arrived on Monday night. We have 2 more people coming later this week as well. So the situation as we know it is that, as you mentioned at the start, earthquakes have been felt on the Manua Islands for about 3 weeks now. The first report we have is on July 29th. And these earthquakes are still continuing today. We were able, in our visit to the Manua Islands a few days ago, we brought 2 very basic earthquake measuring devices that we put in Fitiuta Elementary School and a private residence on Olosega. And these instruments were able to show us that the earthquakes are close to Manua Islands. They're not at Vailulu'u, which I know was a concern earlier. So these basic instruments have shown that these earthquakes are near the Manua Islands, and what they mean we don't know yet. So the instruments we put in are like wheelbarrows, and on Thursday's flight we will be bringing Cadillacs that we can put around, and that will give us the information we need to know exactly where these earthquakes are happening. So rather than saying near the Manua Islands, we can say they're happening here in the Manua Islands, also how deep they are and how big they are. These Cadillacs, they're not actually Cadillacs, but they're very nice seismometers. They will also be able to tell us whether or not these earthquakes are caused by the volcano. So Ta'u Island is actually a part of a volcano. It's the very tip of a volcano.
Right.
And Ofu and Olosega are another volcano, the very tip of the volcano. So these seismometers, not only will they be able to tell us exactly where these earthquakes are happening and how big they are, but they will be able to help us see whether or not it's volcanic processes which are causing them, or if it's just the earth moving around a little bit and resettling itself for whatever reason. So that is the information I can provide at this stage.
Right. So you're saying that it's not far from Manua? Is that what you're saying, that the shakes are somehow very, very close to Ta'u? Is that what it is?
So what, again, because we have the wheelbarrows, we can't provide very definitive locations,
Right.
but they are much closer to the Manua Islands than they are to Vailulu'u. So before there was question as to whether these earthquakes were caused by Vailulu'u, we can say no, they're not. They're either very close or on the Manua Islands, but we're waiting for the Cadillacs to be able to say where on the Manua Islands, or if it's just next to it.
So in the event that, so in the case that it's closer to Ta'u, as you say, because we don't know exactly where it is, because unless you get those machines through, then we'll be able to pinpoint exactly to where it is. In the event, though, that it's near Ta'u, is this good in a way, or is this is that a fair question to ask? Is this, I don't think it's a good thing, but you know what I mean? Like, is this like, are we expecting something big like the one that happened in Tonga, or?
Right. So there's 2 questions in there, so let me answer both of them. So first of all, the volcanoes of Ta'u and Ofu Olosega, they are a different kind of volcano than the one in Tonga. So the one in Tonga is caused by a subduction zone, so that's when one plate is diving underneath the other plate. And those kinds of volcanoes can produce very explosive eruptions, like we saw in January earlier this year. the volcanoes here in American Samoa are caused by a hot spot. So that's a lot more like Hawaii. They're the same kind of volcano as the Hawaii volcanoes. So while there can be what to us humans looks like quite dramatic eruptions, they're a lot smaller, much more contained than the ones that can be happening in Tonga. So it's a different kind of volcano. So that's one thing. In terms of these earthquakes, I wish they weren't happening. It's so stressful to live through, and now it's 3 weeks. That's a very long time to be living with these constant earthquakes. Again, we can't definitively say what they are. They might be earthquakes that just happen to be on or near a volcano, or they might be caused by the volcano. And our fancy instruments will help us understand that. But what I will say is that if we look around the world, when there are earthquakes that happen near a volcano like this, about 10 to 20% of the time they can lead to an eruption. But 80 to 90% of the time the earthquakes just go away. And we don't know which journey we're on right now. So maybe there will be an eruption if these are caused by the volcano, and maybe there will not be.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So, because I've seen somewhere, because there was something that was shown in one of the videos that I saw of what's happening in Manua. And they're like these little earthquakes, they're like little stars popping up everywhere. And again, the person who did this study is unable to tell exactly what's causing these earthquakes. And as you said, I'm glad you made that very clear, because what happened in Tonga is still very fresh in the people's minds, and that is what's driving some families, perhaps I can say, to leave their homes in Tonga. I mean, you've been to Manua already, and you've seen that some families have already left their homes to camp in schools. And you've been to Manua, so what was the reaction? Are people getting better now in terms of their mental capacity? Because I know that you've sat down with most of them and you discussed what's happening. And was it well received in Manua?
So we had 3 community meetings, not just me, but also partners from NOAA and partners from the government here, especially public health and emergency management. So we had 3 community meetings. Each was more than 2 hours, and we were very open with the questions that we were asked. We did our best to answer. Our message is not necessarily reassuring, but I'm very grateful that we were able to spend that time with the residents of the Manua Islands.
Okay. And what was the reaction? What was their main concern? Can you tell us? What was?
Just wanting answers.
Yeah.
It's very understandable. I mean, this shaking has been going on for so long now, and just wanting to know why. Is it something very concerning? When we first got there, our first meeting, we had just installed the small wheelbarrow seismometers. They're about this big. They're very small. And so we didn't have any information yet other than what the residents have been graciously sharing with us. But the next day we were able to say, actually, it's not Vailulu'u, it's closer to the Manua Islands. So we shared that information as soon as we could. So the first day there were a lot of questions about whether a tsunami could form from Vailulu'u. Now that we know it's not Vailulu'u, we're focusing on the Manua Islands and looking at what an eruption could happen. Again, this sort of activity does not guarantee an eruption at all, but it's something that we need to prepare for just in case.
Dr. Drew, you wanted to add on to that?
I don't have a whole lot to say. Natalia summed it up very well, but yes, this, whenever your environment changes and you go from living on an island that doesn't shake to one that all of a sudden starts shaking several times a day, it can be incredibly scary, seeing your environment change like that. And we definitely, with our partners, would like to get answers to people as soon as possible as to what is happening out there. So Natalia, Eleanor, and the team that went out to the Manua Islands, they have done a fantastic job of setting up these little seismometers we've got and getting some initial answers. But we very much hope that on the Thursday flight we get the Cadillac of seismometers out here and that we can soon get out there and provide even better answers for the residents of the Manua Islands.
Right, because somewhere I read somewhere that we have people now linking what's happening in Manua to the earthquake that caused the big tsunami that devastated many parts of Samoa. Is there any truth to that? I mean, apparently the plate has shifted and it's causing all these, all these little earthquakes. Is that the case, or I don't know? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a.
So the small earthquakes, I mean small, they don't feel small, but they're small earthquakes. They're magnitude 2 to 3 as best as we can, and they're on the Manua Islands, whereas the earthquake that caused the tsunami that was devastating, that was on the Tonga Trench, so a very different location.
Right.
Yes.
Eleanor?
May I just add?
Yeah.
And also one thing to notice is maybe you can further explain is that the Earth is always moving.
Shaking, yeah.
So we monitor the earthquakes activity across the Pacific, or I guess across the world, through the CISN, which we get the reports from USGS, and it's mainly because we're concerned about earthquakes that may cause tsunamis, strong enough to cause tsunamis. For American Samoa, that's an earthquake with a magnitude 7.1. And just in daily operations, we always get notifications. So people may think that the earth is just at a standstill, but maybe you can elaborate further about the movements of the earth.
Yeah, so the earth is a very dynamic place, and while there's, especially near volcanoes and earthquakes, it's always adjusting, and usually those adjustments are too small for us humans to notice.
Mm.
But the earth is always in motion, and Eleanor and her team are looking for the very big earthquakes that cause tsunami, whereas the earthquakes here, we don't know yet if it's because of the volcanoes, but it's a different source.
Mm. Dr. Drew, we have been getting a lot of reports from Manua. The one we received this morning, that there was a sudden jolt this morning. It was stronger than the one they heard yesterday. They felt yesterday, and the day before. I guess the report that's coming from Manua is that it's every day it's getting stronger, shorter, sometimes not too strong but longer when it shakes. Is this normal, or should they be worried?
It very much depends. So the Earth, as Natalia just explained, it's constantly in motion, and there are several types of earthquakes. Some of them we call tectonic, where the rocks just slide past one another.
Right.
Whereas at a volcano, and we don't know what kind of earthquakes are going on out at Tahu, it could be that it's fluid movement. So magma is a fluid. It can break rocks as it moves as well, as can water. And some of these fault zones where earthquakes take place, they can wax and wane in their activity. So sometimes activity can escalate and sometimes decrease. And at the moment, we don't have enough information to really say how worrisome it should be. It's definitely above background levels because people out there were not feeling earthquakes before 3 weeks ago. So the fact that they're feeling earthquakes now, and the fact that some days that they're feeling more than others, it can be disconcerting, and it might feel, we've had more earthquakes today than we did yesterday.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that things are escalating, because the next day they might have less earthquakes yet again. So these do go in pulses sometimes, these earthquake swarms, and we really will not have a true answer or grasp of the situation till we get the other seismometers out there and are able to actually record where the earthquakes are coming from, how deep they're coming from, and what type of signal they're generating. Then we can get a better sense of, if we're counting more earthquakes and the location's changing, how worrisome it should be for the residents of the Manua Islands.
Okay. So say we get say it explodes. you know, it's just a, you know, but will it be like a big one, or is it just a, because I know you've mentioned this before in one of the meetings in which you compared it to a can of Coke. Is that the same position you're taking in case something
Right.
happens?
So I've described a few times that the kind of the kind of volcano that Tonga is if you took a can of Coke and you shook it real good and then you open the cap, and then what happens? It really explodes because you've pressurized the gas in that Coke. And when you remove the cap, then suddenly the pressure is reduced and it just goes boom. So that's the Tonga eruption.
Right.
Whereas the volcanoes here, it's as though you took a can of Coke and you opened it and the gas was able to escape. So it's a very different kind of eruption. So the ones here are much less explosive than the ones in Tonga. But what I will say, so there's 4 situations ahead of us.
Right.
So we don't know which one of these we're traveling on. One situation is that the earthquakes will go away. That's
what you're hoping.
That's what we're really hoping.
Okay.
But the Earth holds her cards very close to her chest and doesn't like to let her secrets out as to what she's thinking. So that's one possible journey. The other one, so we have three more, and those 3 are different eruption scenarios. So one scenario would be an eruption that is well contained under the water. So it's in the ocean, far from land, still within the Manua Island region, and still associated with the volcanoes of the Manua Islands, but offshore. So there's actually an eruption in 1866 that happened about 3 kilometers east of Olosega. And we do have accounts that we can share with you of that eruption. So that eruption was contained by the sea. It made some very unsettling noises. The sea changed color. There were a lot of dead fish. There was smells of gas. There was some what we call volcanic ash. So that's like very fine flour-grained rock that goes caused by this eruption onto the land in this case. So it was a very scary time. But that eruption would if there has to be an eruption, that's what we would hope happens. So that's one possible scenario. Another one would be what we would call a dry eruption. So this would be up on the slopes where there's no groundwater and no seawater to interact. And so then the lava will come to the surface. There will be explosions very close by, and a little hill might form with the material that's being ejected. There might be a lava flow, and there will certainly be volcanic gas and some ash. So that would be upslope. That's another possibility. What is for us the worst case situation is if there's an eruption near the coast, either shallow water or very close to the coast, or in a place where there's a lot of groundwater. And then the magma rising and the water, they don't like to mix. And so then you would get a coastal eruption that produces what's called a tuff cone. So the harbor on Ta'u, that's within the arms of a tuff cone. So that's just to show about how big this can be. And this can also eventually lead to lava flows and other effects. And of course, volcanic gases and ash. But that will cause a localized explosions, not as big as what we saw in Tonga, a lot smaller than Tonga. But that would be a place where you would not want to be nearby, not too nearby.
Okay. And so you've been to Manua, you've come back. Well done on that. That's great. I'm glad you've sorted that out with the people in Manua. We've just been told that Governor Lemanu has issued. I've got a copy of it here. Governor Lemanu has just issued an order declaring the state of disaster emergency related to the earthquakes felt in Ta'u. So, which means that there will be more to be done in Ta'u. So when are we expecting the equipment to arrive? Is it this week or next week?
Thursday night, we're hoping. I mean, we won't know until it's actually on the plane. But the plan, and we're working very hard, is for those. We're bringing 4 of the very nice seismometers, so 4 Cadillacs. We're bringing that on the flight, and we'll be taking 3 of the instruments to the Manua Islands, and then we'll be leaving 1 here on Tutuila.
And do you install them straight away the minute they arrive in Manua, or do you have to wait
We need to pick the right sites. So there's actually, as I understand the plan now, and plans always change, but Dr. Drew and one of the seismologists who's coming on Thursday night flights and one person from NOAA are going to go, we hope, on Friday or early Saturday to start to pick the best locations for these. And then the boat will be coming on, they will be leaving on Sunday night and arriving Monday morning. And so they're scouting the locations. We can't just put them anywhere. There's some important criteria for these sites. But as soon as we can, we will get the instruments in the ground and sending data. And we have an earthquake scientist who specializes in volcano on standby who will be looking at the data as soon as it's available.
And so how fast can we get this data? As soon as you install, you get the data straight away?
Yeah, it gets sent around the world, actually. So,
okay.
But yes, of course, for us to be able to provide information about the earthquakes, there need to be some earthquakes. So it will take a little bit of time to get enough earthquakes to happen to be able to say more about actually where they're located and what they mean. So it's not like the instrument will be installed and a minute later we'll have all the answers. So I can't provide a timeline, but I will note that with these very rudimentary seismometers that we put in, so the wheelbarrows, we were able to rule out Vailulu'u within 18 hours.
Dr. Drew, did you have anything else to say before we switch back to Eleanor?
Yes, so as Natalia said, Thursday we are hoping to have 2 more USGS staff on island, both of them seismologists and very versed in earthquakes that come from volcanic regions. So they really are the experts as far as ground shaking goes. Natalia and I, we're geologists, we're good with volcanic hazards, and we've done what we can, but we should give a big shout out to those still back in Hawaii as well as the people here on the islands who have given us so much help. And in the meantime, we do hope to be sending a team of myself and a seismologist and someone from the National Weather Service over to Manua, hopefully as early as Friday. And we do have 2 more rudimentary seismometers we hope to place out in the Manua Islands, as well as picking and prepping the sites that would be ideal for these Cadillac of seismometers. And that'll really help with the install while they're being transported over to the island. So, being able to find good sites and get them ready, leveling the ground or digging the holes, getting them ready to go will really help with us being able to install them in a very timely manner and getting them hooked up so that the information can start to flow and we can start to really pinpoint down what is going on out in the Manua Islands as far as these earthquakes are going.
Again, thank you so very much for everything that you're doing and for coming over to assist us with what's happening in Manua. It is definitely not easy for those living on Manua Islands, because I know for a fact that the numbers of those who are camping out in schools continue to increase because of the fact that they are fearful of what may happen in Manua, especially with what happened in Tonga. I think but I'm glad we've sort of cleared that, that what happened in Tonga is not going to happen here, so that's good. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Eleanor, whainai sau noa ai li whaumaina le tātou proklame o lewa na mani na tala au o Manua, lea na tau tala no manai o tātou ainga ma nai o tātou tangata le tūmalo. O la se tali mai a tātou tangata, o la o ai tū o lo whapole ina i la tō o afo i vaenga lo mo mea i sosoani.
I whawhitai lava mo lewa noa, e moni na mato o atu i le motasai Manua, mato tata noa i le itumalo i oi i whale asao, tau, i whapea whitiuta, i whapea o fumalo senga. I e tele a ona pole i a tangata awai, i o le o mato o atu i o, ai le o tinoa o le atonu le mafuaanga o le mafui e. O le ala o le anganga lava o mātou malanga, whawhitai tapo i malo, ia o atu ia whaalongo, e tele ina ia whaalongo ma whaatatala noa ina ia ripoti o langona i manonofo i tāta i oi Manua. Ia na lei lava ia le mātou malanga, tele lava ia ne tangata o lo popole it's rightfully so beon tanoa to for mai if in ta fo ia about o lo tele lava ia uncertainties au fie loa la to mafuanga o fie loa la to I le feeling e mana o ia ona fai la to so o le mato team lana mato sa mato oi fo I male Department of Health ia fa le DHSS ia na fa so fo la to na tu to fo misi fo la to services if so ania to ia o lo stress po mo le anxiety so ania to I community sia na mato o iai ai mo temini ia if you na fo mato ia lo mato po le ato ni mafuanga em fai e ona iloa moni po le ale reaction e mana onia ona fai ele malo I fa pe ia tangata o lo ye be manua a wa temini ele o lo le tato po le alma fuanga o ni mafui ia a tonu se yo o mai ia masini ia le po le stofi o le fa pe tonu ui le va ale tonu ui le so mafua ia ona toe mawai lo le ile mafua anga tonu o lo mafua ia mafua ia
Malofa Taylor no we're running out of time but very quickly what should they be looking out for in Manua while we're waiting for the machines to come through and the data to become available what should they be looking out for in Manua
Right. So we're so grateful for the very important observations that have been shared with us by the residents of Manua. So we continue to encourage residents to report earthquakes that they have felt, also describing what they have felt. If they smell something weird, like a rotten egg, we would really like to know. If suddenly there's big areas where vegetation is dying, we would like to know. If suddenly the ocean changes color or there's areas of dead fish, we would really like to know. And if suddenly there's cracks opening up in the ground, we would really like to know that. Those observations are very, very important to us because they help us build a bigger picture as to what is happening. Can I say one last thing? So the U.S. Geological Survey monitors U.S. volcanoes in the U.S. and territories. For each volcano, we set what's called a volcano alert level. Right now, the volcanoes of American Samoa are unassigned because we don't have the monitoring equipment here. But quite soon, we will be setting the volcano alert level for the volcanoes of the Manua Islands. So I will provide more information as to what those levels mean. But this is not meant to be a scary thing that suddenly there's an alert level. This is a standard thing that we do where we have the information. And so quite soon, there will be an official alert level for the volcanoes.
We're looking forward to that, Dr. Natalia. Dr. Drew, final comments before we wrap things up?
I would just like to say thank you to everyone in American Samoa for your hospitality, and yes, please continue to report anything out of the ordinary in the Manua Islands that might be of help to us, and we hope to get answers as soon as possible.
Hello, thanks, Dr. Drew. Eleanor?
Ia lei avea o mato pa anga mole toi faafetai lo sunga tosi fa ben malo Kvzktv ai ese upua sala ia fa mangalo au ona.
Hello.
Ai faafetai tele lava mo ngaluenga le ai ni fsili faafsota mai mato o hisa o le ono iva tasi tolu o ia faafetai mai manuia faasausaunga Amerika Samoa.
Paftai ia lana wa topa mo mai lo tatou tunu o le tatou whaataloranga whaapitoa o le nei vaeng o le afiafi ma sunga I fomai mai Hawaii ia rangata fo I lea o le whalato ia Illinois Lutu Macmua mai le tatou ofisa va ai tau I tafuna whaamala malamatu le tatou tunu o le tūlanga pe o le tūlai mai manua pe ona tau silafia whaamala malamatu masalo pe toi tasil vai aso tanu mai leo tatou masidi ma avina tuloi manua ia ona tatou mawai lo leo le mafuanga tonu lava lai ona lulu nei mafu e le tu malo mo le atu le whaafetai o la whaipea ia tatou tala noanga whaapea ma Dr. Natalia, ma Dr. Drew, ale ngā te lea o le whanatoi a Eleanor e whaatala noa i nai mata upu whaapenei. Just saying that we will continue to have discussions like this in the future, just so that the people are aware of what's happening in Manoa. But we do want to thank you once again for joining us in the program this evening. We'll have more from Dr. Natalia and Dr. Drew, and of course from Eleanor, more in the future. Until then, good night, everyone.